Hi everyone, I hope you're doing great and have a great time so far in the series that we are doing with all the content creators and the producer across the world. Today is luckily we got a chance to get our hands on one of the leading producers in Pakistan. In the future you will see a lot of projects coming out of production house in his company, and at the same time let me tell you that he's an executive producer from the Hollywood. Thank you so much Mr. Habib Baracha, and he is also from a very respectable group that is working for the welfare of Pakistan, and they did a lot of contribution in our country and represented us globally as well. So thank you so much first of all for your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Sure. So, where will you want to start from? Should we go straight to producer's questions, or we should?
Up to you. Whatever you want to bring on, I mean, happy to be answering any question.
Sure, sir. So, sure. So, the first thing is I would like to ask you, being a producer by myself, and you did a lot of films. Like I hope like it's more than six now, right now, right? So, it's a question that is it might not have a certain absolute answer to that, but what makes a bad film go wrong actually?
So you mean no, not go wrong. Then you mean what makes a film go wrong, or
Yeah.
what makes a bad film? Okay. So I mean, I think it all starts first and foremost with the story. If the story is not compelling, if the story is not strong enough, uh, keeping in perspective, of course, कि जी, is it made for a local audience? Is it made for an international audience? That's the first thing. Second thing, as important or almost as important, is the quality of acting and directing of the film. Because even if the story is very, very good, and if you're not able to convert that onto the screen for the audience to be able to feel that, be that in acting or in terms of how it's been directed, it's going to be a disaster, no matter what. The best of the best projects, if they're not delivering on those things, they're going to flop and fail. By the way, you want me to answer in English or Urdu?
Whatever you feel comfortable with. I think English is a global language, so that will be
Sure.
much more um, understandable for people globally. So
All right.
coming out of that thing that you just recently explained, that it's actually the screenplay that actually defines the failure and the success of a product most of the time, and obviously the creative process. So there's always a debate between uh, creativity and the budgeting and the logical reasoning from production point of view. So what do you think? What's the right formula, or what's the right variable for a commercial point of view success of a film or a project?
Uh, so again, look, I think it all comes down to uniqueness, to the story, because there's no right or wrong answer for what is a good story.
Yeah.
Anything can be a compelling story. I mean, it could be in romance, it could be in history, it could be in action. I mean, any of the genres, right? I mean, there's a reason why all the genres that exist are successful. Otherwise, why would people be making movies in those genres? There's a market for all,
Exactly.
but it needs to be compelling. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be real. It needs to make the viewer feel like it's immersive, that they forget. If it's a comedy, it should make them laugh and feel like they're in it. If it's a horror, it should scare them. It's romantic, it should make them feel those emotions. End of the day, it's emotion based. All anything, it could be any of those emotions. But the objective of films as a medium is make the audience feel emotion. So
Very well said. So it's like the biggest variable in a success of a project. So
mhm,
nowadays, if we look around, I will talk about a little bit about OTT platforms. Like we have many
mhm,
platforms coming up nowadays, even if we see in the developing countries as well. So startups are investing, big companies are investing in that, and it's affecting the theaters, right, in different ways. So, what do you think? Is it a positive thing? Obviously, it comes with some pros and cons. but how it's actually transforming the content industry. And being a producer, what you think, like, what's going to be the future with OTT platforms coming in?
So, look, from a creative perspective, OTT platforms are excellent. Why? Because you have so many more avenues available where you can actually put your content, and people have the accessibility much cheaper, much easier. Um, if you go to a cinema, fixed times. If a cinema at a cinema, if they're not getting a certain number of viewers for a particular content, they'll take it off and replace it. What happened in Pakistan on this Eid, for example, you must have heard.
Yeah.
So the thing with OTTs is that people can view on demand. So someone wants to watch it at 3 in the morning, no problem. So from a content perspective, I think that's excellent. Uh, the problem lies in how do you get it onto those platforms, right? Again, you have to be realistic. You have to create content, not because people only and solely will see anything, but you have to create content that people will want to go out of their way to see, because the quality of that content in terms of storyline, in terms of acting, in terms of directing is that good. And mind you, that doesn't always translate into a very, very big budget. It doesn't have to. It can be done in a reasonable amount. It can't be done for free, but it can be done in a reasonable amount of money also.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And how you take the obsession with the ranking and the box office success of the producers and the companies, and do you think that is it the same thing for you as well, or do you feel differently?
So for me, look, I mean, I've done now, I'm on my sixth international project, seventh now, sorry, animation. But I decided very early that I'm going to take projects. First of all, it's not my core business, but I understood. We had this primary discussion a little bit yesterday about some of these things. But for me, it's a learning. So I tried to pick projects which were as diverse as possible, one from the other, so that I get a very well-rounded. I'm not boxing myself into a particular genre or a particular category. So I've done action, I've done, thrillers, I've done. Now I'm doing an animation. I've done horror. I've done art house. So so the thing is that if you want to be successful in it, you need to have a well-rounded exposure and experience. Now, I think the problem here is that a lot of people, you know, they just do one or two and they get a little bit of success and they'll be like, okay, gee, that's it. Box office is important, but it depends. You see, because if you're doing, let's say, a festival film,
Yeah.
there's going to be no box office.
Yeah.
Right? So it depends. I mean, if you're doing something which is made for OTT, completely different, there's not going to be a box office. So you have to first identify very categorically, clearly, what is the medium that you're going to be putting this out on, who is your target audience, and then you have to create the content according to that, for that audience, based on what they want to see. Not what you want to put out, what they want to see.
And do you think it's a good initiative from the OTT platforms that they're not disclosing the business numbers and the rankings and the viewership time mostly to the producers and the directors on their projects?
Well, look, the way I think about that is they may not disclose it, but they do run, it's a business, they do run those matrices internally. So, and they have so much data, like take any of the major OTT international platform, Amazon, Netflix, Disney's coming up now, there's HBO, uh, each one of them, I say, anyone who has more than a couple of million users has enough data points to determine and has a big enough volume of or library of content that they can analyze all genres. They can analyze what their viewers, the type of content their viewers watch. So when you take a content to a particular OTT and let's say they accept it based on historical prices, you may not be able to get an idea of how much viewership you're getting, but you do have an inkling of how much similar content was sold for. Now, those prices, because it's a business, those OTTs come up with those prices in a way which is fair to keep incentivizing producers, directors, content creators to make more content, but at the same time, it has to generate enough revenue for the platform that the platform makes money, because otherwise the platform would run out of business. So it's a balancing act, right? So when they're not going to tell you, they simply won't take the content if they think there's not going to be enough streams.
Yeah.
And frankly, that is what's happened with a lot of Pakistani content, because it's not that our content is expensive. Our content is very cheap. Even when I hear numbers at which they've been offered to these platforms, very low numbers from an international perspective. So one begs to question, why are you not buying it, right? And are people, oh gee, this happened, that happened, possibly. But if the content is strong and if there's a demand, no one can stop it. It's that simple.
Yeah.
If your content is good and you have a market for it, they'll take it. You won't have to go to them. They'll come to you and say, we want the content.
Yeah, I think recently few dramas came up on Netflix. So few words like MD production, Sound TV's production, and
Mhm.
they took it for some time, and I think it's a
Yeah.
very good verdict for what you just said. So because we're just coming down to now, what you mentioned, the producers anatomy that we are discussing right now. So how you think the stereotyping of producers is affecting the future generations? And we lot of the time we see that people want to be filmmakers, they want to be actors, but we see a lot of lack in the urge to become producers. Yeah. So if you see like in Pakistan, there is a certain kind of stereotyping for producers, and you can give us more information for the Hollywood and the globally the perspective is, and how you see we can change and how you see it's changing over the time.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the biggest difference between Pakistan and abroad when it comes to production or producers, look, it's never a. There are very few producers internationally also who actually carry a name. Steven Spielberg, who was a director and then gone into production. You have with him David Geffen, because he was a music producer and with Geffen Records, ended up getting into DreamWorks was Steven Spielberg, David Geffen, and a third partner. I forget the third partner's name right now, but uh, if you look internationally, there are very few producers who have a very big name uh, because they're behind the camera. So, or you have the studio level production guys who are basically the studio heads. They're the producers as well.
Exactly.
Now, in Pakistan, the issue is that majority of the uh, content is created primarily by TV channels and a few, let's say, other producers, but who work independently for TV channels or in partnership with those media houses, even to release movies. A lot of them have not all, but a lot of them don't have a background in film. I didn't either. But then I spent money, I went out, I learned, I worked with some of the biggest names in the industry globally, right? And that's where I'm coming back from. The people here aren't getting that exposure. And even after getting into it and so as a commercial venture, they're not willing to go out. Or even if you can't spare the time and go out, they're not generally willing to bring in those people to improve the overall quality of the industry. And that's showing in the quality of product of the content. Uh, Dramas. I think today our dramas may still be all right, but if I compare them to when I was growing up in Pakistan, and there was one channel, and the first private channel NTM had come out, STN NTM, and they used to show some dramas. At that time, there was no VOD, there was no Netflix. It was very difficult to even get good movies because it was VCR times. Everyone used to sit as a family around the TV and watch because the quality of those dramas, the actual content, the acting, the messaging was very strong. Now the problem is, it could be an advantage, but it's also a problem that there's so many channels and everyone's hungry for content. They take anything and everything and they make it into something, and because they have to fill the air time. And it's actually led to quite a strong degradation of the quality of content. And some of the folk that I'm seeing, I don't do dramas, so it's not that I'm trying to take someone's business away, nor do I have any desire to get into TV dramas. But I really question, okay, what are you showing? I've seen content locally recently on very big channels. I won't name them or I won't name the show, but kids are being beaten up, women are being abused. And I have to question, okay, in a society like Pakistan, which is already very, unfortunately not very highly educated, and their main source of information is television, is this the type of content that we should be showing? Does this help our society? And I'm not saying everything has to be about messaging, but as a human being, everything I've learned in my life and will continue to learn is all based on what I've seen and what I've heard. There is no third way, right? Even when a kid goes to school, he learns based on what he's hearing and what he's seeing. So, television has become a very, very important medium in terms of what people are learning. Not everyone has access to high speed internet and all. Basic TV, right? What are you showing? And what is the impact it's going to have on our society? Is it good for our society? I don't think so. I mean, some will disagree with me, but I don't think showing kids, 12-year, 10-year-old kids being beaten up for whatever reason on TV, I think you're actually encouraging that kind of behavior in the society and should not be.
So,
Because we are not an educated society to that degree, that we understand that this is fiction.
so how you think, as a producer, as a production house, to which extent it's needed to be apolitical? For example, we'll just take example of films that now they're taking a lot of business from China, but when it comes to certain topics, certain tonality in their films, or certain visuals, they have to restrict themselves just based on a massive number they have in China or some other countries. Back then, if you see India as well. So, what do you think? What can be the limit to that liberty and creative freedom that we have?
You mean in terms of Pakistani films, or you mean in terms of
Glo-
Chinese or other films?
globally, like you just spoke that a content makes an impact on the audience. So, do you think
Sure.
we can be apolitical all the time, or we need to be political sometimes?
I don't think political is the right word. I think what needs to be done is messaging, right? And a good example of that is, especially when you're talking about television, because TV has different censor levels, films have different censor levels, obviously, and Pakistan mein abhi tak, I don't think we really our rating jo karte hain bhi hain, you know, it's based on, I don't know frankly ki kya exact criteria, because sometimes you're seeing a movie and you're wondering कि यार इसमें this should be R, and you see कि जी 10-10 साल के 12-12 साल के बच्चे बैठे हुए हैं, and you're like, why are they watching blood and gore and
Exactly.
killings and shootings and whatnot? It's not allowed. I mean, so look, I mean, marketing is very important. Luckily or unluckily, of course, social media is helping. I think that's a great way to get it out through, especially through social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook. Quite cheap still in this part of the world, and the amount of time that people are using, or if you look at the demographics of Pakistan, the amount of time the average Pakistani is spending on social media is much higher when compared to the numbers for the United States, for example. So it's funny, Kiji, you're getting more time, but still it's cheaper to market it over here because of the value, those things. But so it's more bang for your buck, so to speak. And the best thing about social media is that it's direct to customer, right? There's no middleman, there's no marketing fee, agent fee. You know, you can monitor, decide at actual when you want the ad to be run, who's your target market, which you can't do on a television ad. You can't do this on mainstream media. You can't do this in print media. So from that perspective, I think social media is the way to go for advertising. Uh, the result of it, a little harder to quantify as yet because I don't think there's enough data on it, or at least I'm not aware of it. But I would be, quite certain that the result would be far, far greater on a conversion basis when you compare it to normal TV. I mean, end of the day, it's the conversion that matters.
Yeah,
Uh,
makes sense. So, it also brings a question that, you know, have a different answer based on the personality and your own vision, which is the brand integration in the content. Some people believe that there needs to be a very certain kind of integration, and some producers are like, it doesn't matter, you know, it's going to be there for a few seconds. What's your philosophy and take on brand integration in the content?
oh God, okay. Yeah, I hate it. ठीक है? Yes, there's a place to put it where it makes logical sense. And by the way, that can be done through good creative writing as well. For example, one of the storylines that I was working on, which unfortunately due to a problem with writers I had to push or defer, was about a story about it was going to be an action project, and within that I had different types of characters, right? So one of them was this nerdy fellow who's like a little fat. Now this guy, it was the perfect placement for someone like that to be standing there all the time with either a Zinger burger or a Big Mac, because it goes with the personality, right? If he's holding a can of Coke all the time, high carbs, high sugar content things, it goes with the image of the individual. No problem. But if you're going to show, excuse me, can I have a Coke, please? Right? Same thing, but completely different impact. So, unfortunately, what I've seen in Pakistan, for the most part, when it comes to brand integrations,
It's terrible.
is terrible. सर हमारे पास PTCL का वाईफाई लगा हुआ है आप वो यूज कर why is this in a movie? I'm sorry, it does not have any place in a movie because I paid money to come see this movie. I didn't come for it to be a PTCL ad in the smack middle of it. You can do it subtly. You know, you could do it subtly maybe by putting guys walking and there's a PTCL billboard in the background. In the background, then and you can reinforce that by putting it in 4 or 5 different places. Similarly, he gets out, he goes somewhere, maybe there's again, a car going with a PTCL logo on it. No problem, right? Maybe he's entering someplace and there's a work mechanic walking by who's wearing a PTCL. And I shouldn't take PTCL's name because it's the first one that came to mind. कल मुझे वो sue कर देंगे कि जी आपने हमारा नाम. But the point being that whoever the brand is, it can be done. There are placements. Again, this is where production value deteriorates because those in charge are just not thinking about these things. Subliminal, uh, you know, uh, tastefully done,
Yeah,
done in a way where it's
it's so natural.
not in your face. It should look. The same is true for our acting, no? Matlab, everything is overacted. Now that works fine, I guess, for TVCs, but this is not a stage play.
Yeah.
Stage play, you have to. I remember when I was growing up and I was in the Karachi Grammar School, so I used to participate once in a while with this annual plays
Theater, yeah.
and theater. That's all about you know looking up like this and talking, and the more British you sound, the better.
Yeah. And your whole
In
body
theater,
language,
yeah,
it's part of acting in theater.
yeah, in theater. But when it's movies, it needs to all be minimized.
Yeah.
The emotion takes over, which on theater there you can't see because you're too far away from the audience, so you can't see. That's why you have to overly enhance everything and almost literally shout it out. But when you're doing a movie or a show, even it's so in your face.
Exactly.
That's when your acting comes into play. And sadly, it's not, you know, not converting the same that way.
And just on a minor note, like, what do you think wrong in this integration? Is it the brand owners, the brand managers, or is it the like the creative people are so much laid down in front of the brands that they don't even argue with the natural placement?
I think it's a bit of both. To be fair, because chicken and egg wali kahani hai. It's like the brands pay a lot of money for integration. I mean, I've heard anything from, for example, a top level. Again, I won't name people, but it's a top level celebrity female who may have one or two brands she does campaigns for. They'll say कि जी आप इसके अंदर भी वो integration कर दें because she's our face. We want it done. Okay, we'll give you so many million rupees. Producers will accept that because they need to fund the projects, and in the absence of any other form of funding or in real investor base or grants available for the arts, they're left with very limited choices. So I understand why they have to do it. But this is where they need to push back and say, "Dekhen ji, it's a movie. And bilkul kare, but it needs to be done artistically, stylistically, in a way where the audience is not offended." Because I personally think it's offensive to the audience when you do it to such a degree, you know, that because it's not written into the story well. So it could be done, but it then needs to be written into the story well that it sounds organic and original.